In this video, we are going to study Lesson 9.5, Completing the Square. Students will be able to solve a quadratic equation by completing the square. So in the past, we've learned how to solve equations by using square roots, by factoring, and using a graphing calculator. In the following completed examples, I have showed you how to solve a quadratic by using square roots, solve a quadratic by factoring, and solving a quadratic by using a graphing calculator. And here my roots look like they are at 1 and 3. Our method today is going to be called completing the square. Before we can complete the square, we need to review what a perfect square trinomial is. So in this case, we want to know what multiplies to 16 and adds to 8. And we get h plus 4 times h plus 4, because 4 times 4 is 16, 4 plus 4 is 8. So this is called a perfect square trinomial, is what we started with. So why don't you try numbers 2, 3, and 4. Please pause the video while the students work. Here are the completed examples. Number 3 is a more difficult question just because of the lead coefficient being a 9. And notice how in the end on my answers I write them as a factor squared, because this is a perfect square trinomial, so you need to have that squared in there. On the next slide, we need to figure out what this c value would be to make this a perfect square. So I need two things that add to 4 but multiply to give me c. So if we think back to our diamonds, I need two numbers, b and b, that add to 4. So that number has to be 2. So now 2 times 2 is 4, so my c value is 4. Let's try another one. Number 2, I need to figure out what number goes in here. So I need two numbers that add to 12, so I think of 6 and 6. And then what does 6 times 6 multiply to give me? 36. So the value of c would be 36. In number 3, I need two things to add to give me negative 20. So that would be negative 10 plus negative 10. And then negative 10 times negative 10 is positive 100. So 100 is what my c value would be. So the directions again say find a value c such that each expression is a perfect square trinomial. So now, for example, in number 3, we have g squared minus 20g plus 100, and I could rewrite that as g minus 10 quantity squared. And that's what a perfect square trinomial is. So please turn the page. On the next slide, I'm going to teach you how to complete the square. There are steps involved. So step 1, it says get the variables on the left and constants on the right. So I just need to move my 16 over. And what I want to do is make sure that I leave some space. And I'll tell you why I need space in just a little bit. So we're going to do something with this blue. So I move the 16 over by subtraction. And now step 2 says get the leading term alone. Well, our leading term is a 1, so we don't have to worry about that step in this example. Step 3 says find b divided by 2 quantity squared. In looking at the original equation, a is 1, b is negative 14, and c is 16. So using our formula, I get negative 14 over 2 quantity squared. So that's negative 7 squared for 49. And now in step 4, I'm going to take that number and I'm going to add it to both sides. So that's why I left some space, because I'm going to put plus 49 here. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. And now step 5, factor the perfect square trinomial on the left side. And the perfect square trinomial is what I have underlined in blue. So we need to factor that. So what number multiplies to 49 and adds to negative 14? Negative 7. And if you didn't know what that number was, you could look over here and it's this number right here or the number inside the parentheses. And that will be true always. So then if I finish my problem, negative 16 plus 49 is 33. And now step 6 says solve for the variable. So how do I get rid of a square? I take the square root. What I do to one side, I do to the other. And I'm left with the quantity x minus 7. And then when I take the square root, I really get two answers, plus and minus square root of 33. So now my parentheses really don't have any meaning, so I can get rid of them. And now I need to get rid of this 7, so I'm going to add it. So I have a 7 plus or minus the square root of 33, so I'm going to put the 7 in the front, plus or minus in the middle, and then the square root of 33 on the bottom, or next to it, excuse me. So on the calculator, I get 7 plus the square root of 33, and 7 minus the square root of 33. You don't have to have a graphing calculator to do this. So then my two answers are 12.7, 5, and 1.26. So the trouble with completing the square is you have a lot of steps to do, and your answers are going to be ugly. They're going to be decimals. We're going to have to round them. Sometimes they'll be nice and clean, but not always. So let's practice again with another example. The directions are still on slide 1, so let's try this one. So we need to get variables on the left, constants on the right. So your problem should look like this. Make sure you leave some space. And this is where we're going to have our perfect square trinomial. So step 2 says get leading term alone. Well, our leading term is a 1, so we don't have to worry about it. So now we're working on our b divided by 2 squared. So our b value in this case is negative 16. So that gives us a negative 8 squared for positive 64. Step 4 says add that number to both sides. So I'm going to add 64. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. And now I need to factor my perfect square trinomial. So that's the blue. And I know it's going to look something like that. And my constant adds to 16. So we're thinking what number multiplies to 64 and adds to negative 16. Otherwise we can cheat and look over here in our formula and we get negative 8. So we just completed the square and now we have to find our solutions and we're going to round to the nearest hundredth. So we need to get rid of the square. So the opposite of a square is to take the square root. What I do to one side, I do to the other. And that gets rid of my square. And I can take the parentheses off. And when I take the square root, then I get two answers for plus and minus 4. And now my last step is to add 8. So I get 8 plus or minus 4. So this really gives me two answers. I need to do 8 plus 4 and 8 minus 4. So 8 plus 4 gives me 12, and 8 minus 4 gives me 4. So those are my two answers. Don't forget, do not put those in parentheses. These are two separate coordinates, 12, 0, and 4, 0. Let's do one more together. So first we need to get this and leave some space, get our constant to the right side. Then I'm looking for b divided by 2 quantity squared. So that's 6 divided by 2 squared. 3 squared is 9. So I'm going to add that value to both sides. My next step is to factor the perfect square trinomial on the left. So what multiplies to 9 and adds to 6? I'm looking at positive 3. Now we're solving for the variable. So I need to get rid of the square, so I'm going to take the square root. What I do to one side, I do to the other. And I get g plus 3. And remember, when I take the square root, I get two answers for plus or minus. The square root of 4 is 2. So now I have to subtract 3 to move it. And I get negative 3 plus 2 and negative 3 minus 2. So one of my answers is negative 1, and the other answer is negative 5.